And first at 4, 2 people involved in the October 20th, 2020 deadly drive-by shooting of 17-year-old Edwin Davidson Jr. on Orchard Loop in Wardville were sentenced today by Judge Greg Beard in the Rapides Parish Courthouse. 23-year-old Tyrone Compton of Cheneyville was found guilty by a jury on May 19th of second-degree murder. 2 other co-defendants, Terrence Armstrong and Andrew Mayo, were previously convicted on the same charge. Compton was part of a group of 5 people charged in connection to that case. And according to Pineville police, the shooting was tied to an earlier narcotics transaction in which part of the group was shorted Xanax bars. While Davidson was present for the transaction, prosecutors said he was not part of it. And when the group went to Orchard Loop to confront the dealer who shorted them the bars, Davidson was killed but was not the intended target. Prosecutors said Compton, Armstrong, and Mayo shot from the vehicle, and one of Mayo's bullets was the lethal shot. Compton was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of probation, parole, or suspension of sentence. Afterward, 20-year-old Caitlin Carlino of Dry Prong was sentenced. She pleaded guilty to a count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. On August 17th, 2021, she also provided testimony at the trials of the co-defendants. Prosecutors said Carlino was in the passenger seat in the vehicle during the drive-by but did not shoot. The driver of the vehicle, which belonged to Carlino, was Pamela Smith. She's serving 20 years for a plea to the same charge. Prosecutors recommended the minimum sentence, so Carlino received 5 years in prison. A victim impact statement was read that was submitted by Edwin Davidson's mom, Shanae Henderson. Henderson thanked Carlino for being honest and helping with the other convictions and told her she hopes she walks away from this with a valuable lesson in life. She said she let herself be used and that she participated in the murder of her son, and she told her to learn to be a leader. Those cases were prosecuted by Lee Hall. Compton was represented by Philip Robinson, and Carlino was represented by George Higgins.